So that brings us pretty close to the start of your firm. So tell me about that. You know, I'm always curious about the origin story. What pushes somebody to start a firm? So before this, you had worked for other firms. You were looking sort of for the thing, ended up in-house. What was the push? Why'd you start your firm?
It was a lot of different things, but the last one that really pushed me was seeing the ability to see the inside of 19 firms, if you can imagine. Well, I guess you don't have to imagine it. You get to do it all the time. I saw the way that they operated. I saw who they hired, who they kept, why they kept them, who they paid, how they billed. And a lot of it was poor decisions. And I knew they were poor decisions. And I kept thinking to myself, I can do this better. I can do this better. But, this doesn't make sense. You can just do it this way. Why aren't they doing it this way? And so that kept coming up for me, and then I just knew I could do it better. So that's when I started, probably a year and a half before we launched is when I started talking to my co-founder, who is one of my best friends, Erin Winterstein. I had to convince her, look at what's going on around us. We can do it. We can do it better. She had a similar story as mine in that we came up in a couple different firms, and we both hit that ceiling of they're no longer talking to us about advancement because managing partners as far as they're willing to let you go.
So let's talk about that. So you had a co-founder. The timing might not have been exactly day one, but you had a co-founder that you had been talking about for a year and a half. Some people get thrust next day. Others do a lot of planning. It looks like you're more on the planning side. So why co-founder versus just alone? I'm curious the thought process there.
I am a social being. I love having people around.
Welcome to the Founding Partner Podcast. Join your host, Jonathan Hawkins, as we explore the fascinating stories of successful law firm founders. We'll uncover their beginnings, triumph over challenges, and practice growth. Whether you aspire to launch your own firm, have an entrepreneurial spirit, or are just curious about the legal business, you're in the right place. Let's dive in.
Welcome to Founding Partner Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Hawkins. This is a podcast where I get to interview founders who are doing cool and big things. And today we've got a guest doing really big things. So I'm happy to welcome Angel Casarez. I think I got that right. Tell me if I got it right. She is the co-founder and CEO of Winterstein Casarez, which is a workers' comp defense firm in Sacramento, California. And they've had exceptional growth over the last few years. We're going to dive all into that. And I'm excited. She's got some other cool stories and other things that she's overcome along the way while she's building this really impressive firm. So, Angel, thanks for coming. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
So we're going to go through your story, but first, why don't you lay the groundwork? Just give us a snapshot of your firm now. So, how many people? Where are you? Do you have different locations? All that sort of stuff.
Sure. So we have 91 total employees. We have 37 attorneys. Our attorneys cover every venue in California, all the way up from Eureka, all the way down to San Diego. We have one brick and mortar office in Sacramento, California. That's what we consider to be our headquarters. Our firm is almost entirely remote. So all of our employees and our attorneys, they all work from home. We've found that to work best for our firm. So we're going to keep it until it doesn't work anymore, if we ever get there. Do you want me to go over the starting part of it?
Well, before we get there, we are going to go over that. But before that, okay, so that's good. We got a snapshot. Let's go back a little bit. So I want to hear about, your early days. Straight out of law school. So you're doing workers' comp now. Did you do that straight out of law school, or how did you end up in the workers' comp?
Sure. So straight out of law school, I was obsessed with property law. It was my first love. I thought it was so fun. And so right out of law school, I started working for my property law professor at the Eviction Defense Collaborative in San Francisco. And for those who know a little bit about San Francisco property law, it is very fast-paced. There's a lot of landlords there that are interested in getting kind of tenants turned around. There's a lot of financial motivation there. So I was working with tenants that had been served their 5-day summons.
Wow.
And including the weekend, they had 5 days to provide a response. most of the tenants in San Francisco do not have legal representation. So it was our job, sometimes they came in on a Thursday, having had been served the day before, and their response was due on Monday. So we had to turn around those responses fast. And those responses were petitions to quash, demurs, answers. We had to do a quick assessment and get something filed. Sometimes I was running down to the courthouse and filing it at 4:59 just to prevent the sheriff from coming out to evict them. So it was exciting. It was great work, but it burned me out in 2 years flat. I would have to cancel birthday parties and cancel anything with my family because I had a trial on Tuesday that I didn't have on calendar on Friday. So as much as I loved it, I had to get out. So as with a lot of my jobs, when I determine that it's the end of the road for me, I resign. With or without a new job or a thought of where I'm going, I resign. So I resigned, and that weekend I went to a graduation for my law school, and I got reintroduced to my evidence law professor who had a workers' comp plaintiff's firm. So that's how I started working at that firm. He kind of lured me in because he did a lot of sexual discrimination and sexual harassment. So I thought that was going to be my calling. And he did workers' comp on the side. And so I fell in love with workers' comp. So I kind of focused on that.
So you started out on the plaintiff side?
I started out on the plaintiff side.
Oh, wow. And so eventually, I know you ended up going in-house, but before you did that, did you switch to workers' comp defense, or did you go from plaintiff?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so again, I knew it was the end of the road for me doing workers' comp plaintiff side, so I resigned. And after I resigned, I had just did a trial with a colleague of mine who was a managing partner at a defense firm. And so she called me and offered me a job. She didn't know I had resigned an hour before she called me. And I initially said no because I thought I was out of the workers' compensation business entirely. I didn't think to switch sides. And I told her no. She convinced me to have lunch with her. She convinced me of how different it is to be on a plaintiff side versus a defense side. I liked everything I heard, so I went to go work for her. So I was on the defense side as an associate attorney for 2 years at that firm. Then I went to my second firm, and I was there for 10 years.
Okay, so you were there. But then, okay, so from there, I guess you went in-house.
Yeah, so from there, again, I didn't resign. I was just kind of feeling like there was something more. I was an associate attorney. I became a senior attorney. I became a partner, a managing partner. And then that's kind of where these artificial ceiling came in, right? There was no discussion about making me a shareholder, no discussion of the possibility of it. And so I needed more than that. So a client approached me and was asking me to come work in-house. And like a lot of attorneys in private practice, we kind of go when you hear in-house because it's a different way of practicing that I didn't want to do and it wasn't for me. But in reality, what she needed was someone to kind of babysit her attorneys. She needed someone, that phrase that people say all the time, if you need an attorney, you need an attorney and then someone to, supervise your attorney. That's what she needed. She needed me to supervise her attorneys. And so when I started there, they were working with 19 different defense firms across the state of California. Way too many firms for the type of program that they had. So I came in, I evaluated the firms, and I built them a program that only had 5 firms that did all their work, and I managed those firms.
So was that like an insurance company or something else that you worked for there?
It's a private company. The company's called Foster Farms. You might be familiar with it. It's a chicken company.
Okay, so they had their own, that's interesting, their own program internally for that versus an insurance company. Okay, so that brings us pretty close to the start of your firm. So tell me about that. I'm always curious about the origin story. What pushes somebody to start a firm? So before this, you had worked for other firms. You were looking sort of for the thing, ended up in-house. What was the push? Why'd you start your firm?
It was a lot of different things, but the last one that really pushed me was seeing the ability to see the inside of 19 firms, if you can imagine. Well, I guess you don't have to imagine it. You get to do it all the time. I saw the way that they operated. I saw who they hired, who they kept, why they kept them, who they paid, how they billed, and a lot of it was poor decisions. And I knew they were poor decisions. And I kept thinking to myself, I can do this better. I can do this better. This doesn't make sense. You can just do it this way. Why aren't they doing it this way? And so that kept coming up for me. And then I just knew I could do it better. So that's when I started, probably a year and a half before we launched is when I started talking to my co-founder, who is one of my best friends, Erin Winterstein. I had to convince her, look at what's going on around us. We can do it. We can do it better. She had a similar story as mine in that we came up in a couple different firms and we both hit that ceiling of they're no longer talking to us about advancement because managing partners as far as they're willing to let you go.
So let's talk about that. So you had a co-founder. The timing might not have been exactly day one, but you had a co-founder that you had been talking about for a year and a half. Some people get thrust next day. Others do a lot of planning. It looks like you're more on the planning side. So why co-founder versus just alone? I'm curious the thought process there.
I am a social being. I love having people around. I have a large family. I have a large, friend base. I keep friends with my friends from grammar school, from law school, from high school. I love having people around. I'm not a person that works well solo. And I knew I didn't want to do this alone. I didn't want to be a sole owner. If I had to do it all over again, I might be more open to exploring the idea, but at the time I was not. And luckily for me, it's worked out perfect. This is exactly the way that we were supposed to build this firm.
And so you guys started August 2020, smack dab in the middle of COVID. And remind me, so we were, here in the South, in Georgia, we didn't stay closed too long. We opened up pretty quickly. What was it like in California? I think I remember stories. You guys were closed down for a long time, right?
Correct. I mean, some would say we're still closed in a way because our calendar has not gone back to normal. We're still doing our hearings remotely. We're doing some expedited trials and trials in person, but for the most part, it's still closed. Think about trying to start a business. I hired an attorney to do our articles of incorporation, and he tells me, normally I do this, but now I have to do this. And he couldn't even give me any specifics on how to file the documents. So it was a challenge in both the business sense and practicing law. And overall, I think it was an advantage now that I look at it because we had to focus and we had to focus real hard. And it wasn't like business as usual because there was no usual. There was no prior business for us. So we had to think of everything from square one. What's the best way, even deciding whether we needed a brick and mortar office. Pre-COVID, we might have just said, yes, of course, everyone has offices. That's what we need to do. But instead, we didn't have that option. So we had to figure out how to make a remote situation work from day one. And we found that it works, and it works really well.
And eliminates a huge line item on the overhead.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So I guess, I don't know if it's courts or administrative bodies or whatever, were those open? Were the workers' comp cases being processed?
Yes, they were being processed, but not in the same way. So we went through a period of trying to figure out how to have hearings via Zoom. Then the hearings became just like you in different types of platforms. So there was a lot of learning, and it was, I would want to say, a couple of years before we saw any, feelings of being back to normal.
And so because you came from in-house to starting this, I imagine you had no clients when you started, or did you?
Correct. No, I didn't have any clients, and I was under the assumption that the company that I left was not going to give me work, right? But luckily that was not true. They gave me a chunk of work, and Erin brought a good number of work. So in total, we started with about 60 files.
That's not too bad. Not too bad.
Not too bad.
Better than zero, right? Better than zero.
Yeah, absolutely. So we were able to hit the ground billing.
And so was it just you two? Tell me who was with you. Did you have
Correct.
paralegal, assistant, any attorneys?
When we started, it was just Erin and I as attorneys, as working attorneys, and we managed to convince one of our colleagues from one of our old firms who had been at that firm for 20 years. She was a office manager, and we convinced her that we saw the light, this beacon of a firm that we could build together. And so she resigned from that firm, having, been there for 20 years, and kind of jumped off the cliff with Aaron and I. And so it was the three of us. We had shared space in an office building and 2 rooms in a shared space. And that's where we launched August 3rd of 2020.
So tell me about the vision in the early days. What did you envision that you would build? What was it that you wanted to build?
We wanted to have a firm of 50 attorneys in 5 years. That was the goal. And we marched towards that goal until about 3 years in, when we realized it was actually a possibility, right? To me, that goal was something that would never materialize, but that's the direction that I was going to head in. And when I realized that it could materialize, we had to, hold on. Maybe we want 50 attorneys in 8 years, or maybe we want to slow down a bit. So the goal was 50 attorneys. And the reason that was the goal was because from what we've learned is, if I wanted a firm that was sustainable, that was a great job for folks, that provided good benefits, that had a solid retirement plan, that had the opportunity for growth, that had management positions, that had everything that I envisioned this firm to have, it can't be a mom and pop shop. It can't be a 5-attorney firm. It has to be a large firm.
Well, I love big visions. I love it. I mean, that just gives me energy hearing other people with big visions. And then I love people that actually go do it. And so I think that, it's a lot of people just play small ball when they start. They're like, if I can just make a living or whatever. You guys said, no, we're going big. We know it. And then you got there, you started going there. And so what made you want to sort of pump the brakes as you were really, today you've got 37 attorneys. It's been about 6 years. So you're pretty close. Why did you guys decide to pump the brakes a little bit?
For, various reasons. The interesting thing about the practice is that, sometimes we have too many clients. Sometimes we have too many attorneys, or not enough attorneys, or we don't stay the same. When we have a growth rate in the last 3 years of over 600%. So we're not the same firm today that we were 3 weeks ago. I had to check the number just before I jumped on this call so that I knew how many employees I had, because I thought we had hit 100 yet. That might be next week. So we're not the same firm. So we have to decide right now, what is our need? And if you ask me that in this second, we're good. We don't need more attorneys. We don't need more clients. We're going to coast for the next 2 months. And then in 2 months, we might need more attorneys. So I will head in that direction. We might need more work. So we'll head in that direction.
So you alluded to something that I've experienced myself, and that others who are building things experience. And that is, if you go too fast, everything starts to break. I imagine You've probably encountered that at least more than once. As you've hit some of these milestones, what's that like, and how did you overcome that?
Yeah, that's really difficult, as you can imagine, with the type of growth that we have. But it's important. The way that I work best is I'm a learner, right? And so when something starts to break, I get excited. I stop and think, okay, this isn't working for 30 people. It's not going to work for 100. Because remember, I'm headed towards 100 attorneys now and maybe 300 employees. So how exciting that I get the opportunity to come up with a solution when I only have 91 employees. I don't want this to break when I have 300 employees. So let me take the opportunity to stop, learn, why did this break? How can I fix it? I go out there and I learn. I interview people. Vendors come to me all the time, and sometimes it matches. Sometimes they come to me and they say, hey, do you have this problem? Actually, I do. I'll give you 5 minutes to convince me that you can solve this problem. And I can learn really fast whether you're going to help me or not. And then I move on to the next thing, and then I fix that. And sure enough, a couple of weeks later, something else will break. And I've come to realize that is the joy of my job. Like, that's what I get to do. And if I didn't want to do that, I'm in the wrong job.
I love that mental approach. So true, because things are going to continually break, especially if you're growing, and especially if you're growing that fast. That is tremendous. 600% in 8 years or 6 years or whatever it is. That's insane. And you kept it together. Now, we're going to add another element to the story here in a minute. But before we get there, I'm curious, you're not everybody's remote, so that maybe adds to the element too. But are you to the point where employees are coming on board and you don't even know who they are? You haven't met them?
Yes, yes. And that has more to do with my health issues that I had than the way that we want to build this firm. Because what I did in the beginning was every new person that started, I would interview them, right? And so you get to a point where that can't happen. So then someone else interviews them and they give me a summary. And then that can't happen. So then, we just adjust. But I want to know when someone gets hired and they start here, we have a very robust Teams network. We have a Teams page for each of our various groups within the company. We have a Teams page for every employee that's just, celebrations. So anytime anyone wants to celebrate something, they put it on the Teams page. So when someone starts here, I'm not sure if you got a chance to look at our social media, but that day, August 1st of 2020, when Erin and I are sitting around her kitchen table about to launch this firm, I look over and I see that she has those pictures of her kids when they started school, and they have a little sign that says, my name is Jack. I'm starting the 6th grade. I like pizza. So then I'm like, you know what? We're going to do that. Me and Erin and Nicole, who was our third person, we're going to do that. So we did it. I bought a poster board at Walgreens, and we got into the office and we had a poster board that says, our name, how many years we've been in the industry, our favorite color, our favorite drink, and our favorite saying. And we do that to this day. It's gotten more sophisticated. It's no longer that Walgreens board. But when a new employee starts, day one, they get a post in the All Teams page that says, welcome, so-and-so. This is a picture of them. This is their favorite things. And everybody welcomes them in, kind of relates to whatever it is that they've posted about. Oh, I like Golden Girls too, or green is my favorite color also. So to answer your question, it's been a challenge, but I feel like we've been able to handle it.
So I love that. I love the Golden Girls reference too. There's probably a whole
Right.
part of the audience that doesn't know what that is.
People look at Golden Girls. You'd be surprised. It's the kids. When the kids say it, I'm like, what's happening?
So it's obvious, and we've talked about this before, but it's obvious culture and creating the culture is very, very important for you. And even, when you're remote, you got to be even more intentional about it. So it sounds like from the beginning, that was something that's very important to you. So how would you describe your culture and what you want to build?
We have, we're very committed to our values. And Erin and I, before we launched, literally sat down and wrote them on a poster board. What are our values? We want workers. We want people that are going to work, not pretend to work, not glamorize work. We want people to get the job done. We want people that are honest, that have integrity, that are not, you make a mistake, you tell us right away, we fix it. Most of the time, all mistakes are fixable, but you have to tell us. We want folks that are kind and respectful. If you're not kind and respectful, you don't last here. Maybe you made it through the interview process, but the minute you're not kind and respectful, you're gone. Because one person is not going to kind of disturb what we're building here. And so we stay true to those values. We have them on our website. We post them everywhere. When we hire, we refer to them. When we fire, we refer to them. When I post something on social media, we look at them. They're really important to us. And sometimes it's hard to stick to those. Sometimes it's really hard to do it. But at the end of the day, that's what we stand for. And you'll see it shine through in everything we do at this firm.
I like that. I think that's very important. And your growth is a testament to that, I think, as well. And so we've talked about that a lot. So 600% in 6 years, you wanted 50 when you started. Now it sounds like 100 is where you're headed, maybe more. And you mentioned this a minute ago, sort of the health issues, which, 600% growth in 6 years is impressive enough. But then you throw in sort of the issue that you mentioned, and it's even more impressive. So tell me a little bit about that, what you're willing to share, because, again, what you've done is already incredible, and working through that piece of it makes it even more incredible to me. So,
thank you. So I have a family history of liver disease. My grandfather died when he was in his early 40s from liver disease. My mom, about 11 years ago, had a liver transplant. My sister, about 7 years ago, had a liver transplant. So April of 2021, so we're, months after we launched the firm, not a year, not even a year, I started having these episodes of, they seemed like allergies. And so my medical team was trying to figure out what I was allergic to. They were well aware of my history. And so we had done all the scans necessary and I was fine. And so for a couple years, it was just, I'd have these allergic reactions and they were trying to figure out, did I get bit by a bug? Did I, was I allergic to all of these things? And what that looked like was that anytime I traveled, so if I got off a plane, I was sick, I would end up in an ER. I was in the ER for probably about 40 plus times while we're building this firm, right?
Wow.
And finally, in February of last year, I was diagnosed with liver disease that led to cancer.
Wow. I mean, well, how are you now? Tell me how you are. How are things now?
I am doing really well. I'm just about 6 months post a liver transplant. All of my numbers are great. I've been released by all of my specialists. I'm down to just one nurse case manager and my primary care physician. I'm doing better than I think I have in 15 plus years. A liver disease is a slow roll. It's not something that from one day to the next you're sick. I'd probably been going down this line for a while and I didn't notice it, but I'm doing great. I have a lot of energy. I'm very healthy. I'm eating well. I'm sleeping like a baby. I wake up well rested. I'm doing great.
So you got the transplant. So is a liver transplant, is that the sort of thing they have to get a good match? Is all of that for that to work?
Yeah, correct. So normally what happens is people receive a liver from a deceased donor. And so I was going to do that. I had a deceased donor and the surgery fell through because it wasn't a good liver. As you can imagine, the frustration of being on the brink of death and having a solution and then the solution being pulled from you was very tough. And so the day after that, my husband signed up to be a donor, and as miracles will have it, he was an exact match on everything.
That's amazing.
Yeah, he got worked up really, really quickly because he had to do 16 plus diagnostic tests. He had to do so much blood work that he asked them like if they could save some for him. And he was a match. So on October 2nd, we both walked into UCSF and they cut out 66% of his liver. They cut out my entire liver and they replaced it with his 66%. And both of the livers have regenerated. So both of us now have about a 98% complete liver.
Wow. That's amazing. That really is amazing. Yeah. And that your husband was a perfect match for what you needed. It's
very rare. I can't tell you the amount of attention we got from the nurses and the doctors. They were so excited about it. They rarely see it, so they were really excited to have us in their care. They took really good care of us. It was amazing.
Amazing story. And, doing well. I'm happy you got through all that. And you're sitting here, you look great, you're healthy, but going through it had to be incredibly difficult emotionally, but also physically. And as you mentioned, you're building your firm at the same time. How the hell did you do that?
Well, Erin Winterstein, first and foremost. Both of us are real tough, as you can imagine. So she took a lot of the burden. That stirs a lot of emotion.
Yeah.
So she was kind of the fill-in CEO, and I had, even though I was sick, I had a lot of time on my hands. So she would give me projects and I would sit there in the middle of the night in my hospital bed and just like, we're figuring this out. The nurses would be like, what are you doing? What are you doing at 3 a.m. on your laptop? I'm like, oh, I'm reviewing attorney resumes. And it kept me engaged. It kept me motivated. This is the joy of my life. Like, I love law. Like, I wanted to be an attorney since I was in the 5th grade. I'm where I'm supposed to be. So it brought me a lot of joy. And being a business owner is where I'm supposed to be. So when you meld those two things together, when people ask me what's the secret of your success, it's really that. It's finding your passion and making it into a sustainable business.
You've got a great partner. You've got a great partner. So, part of what I do is I know a lot of firms that have handshake partnerships that have lasted 40 years. I've also done a lot of law firm partner breakup type work. And so it can go both ways. But when you find the good partner, lots of magic can happen. And so obviously you guys were friends before, but how have you, this is a good example, but how do you guys work together and make this sort of work?
So I see Aaron as my second marriage, right? So I've been married to my husband since 1999. We've been together since I was 17. It's work. I've picked the right person and then it's work. Same thing with Aaron. I picked the right person and then it's work. We know each other just like me and my husband do. I know her finances. I know her children's birthdays. She can recite my social security number. We know each other that well. And that intimacy is what it takes. When we first launched, I thought I had a certain type of personality and she had a certain type of personality, and it was exactly the same. And that's why we're going to succeed. And it wasn't that at all. We're opposites. And that's why it succeeds. Sometimes something is too much for me and she opted in. Sometimes I'm excited to do something, so I get to do it, or she's excited and she gets to do it. But we communicate, sometimes we do therapy. Sometimes we go get our nails done together. Same thing that I do with my husband, really. It's an intentional relationship that is not easy, but it's meaningful and it's worth the work.
And I know you're both very hard workers, so I know partnerships can be hard if one person's not pulling their weight or as much as the other.
Absolutely. It's the same thing as like our values that I tell you is, and sometimes people kind of push back on me and wonder why I always say you have to work, you got to work, because everyone thinks, of course you have to work. But I've been in so many situations where people pretend to work or hide the ball or make things more dramatic than it needs to be. I cut through that real fast. Like, you're here to work. If you don't want to work, that's fine. You can find another job, but you're here to work. And so me and Aaron are the same. We're not afraid of working. We will do I've done every position in this firm. And at any point, I will sweep a floor. I will deliver a check. Like, I'll do anything that is necessary. And I expect that from our people too.
Real quick, if you haven't gotten a copy yet, please check out my book, The Law Firm Life Cycle. It's written for law firm owners and those who plan to be owners. In the book, I discuss various issues that come up as a law firm progresses through the stages of its growth, from just before starting a firm to when it comes to an end. The Law Firm Life Cycle is available on Amazon. Now back to the show. And so another question I have, so I have noticed, and I'm sort of going through it myself here, but as the firm grows, there are limits that you bump into. And some of that's logistical and this, that, and the other. But I think a lot of times it's sort of when the leaders hit sort of a ceiling, there's a ceiling that's sort of hit with the organization as well. So I'm curious as your thoughts on growing as a leader and a person, and then how that is reflected in the firm. Is it a chicken egg thing? What is it? Do they happen at the same time? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it happens at the same time. If you don't want to grow, you shouldn't own a business. And I tell my managers as well, if you don't want to grow, you can't be a manager, because being a manager and a business owner forces you to grow. It forces you to self-reflect. It forces you to identify the type of person you are, the type of person you want to be, the type of person you want to interact with. And man, it's like it punches you in the face sometimes. And you have to stop and decide, which way do I want to go? Do I want to hold on to an ego or an identity that I think is true? Or do I want to learn and grow? Or do I want to build a firm? You can't have both. And it's tough to decide I want to build a firm and not placate my ego, right? And so that work for me represents itself. I have every Friday at 8:30 in the morning, I'm with my therapist, and I'm talking to her about problems. And I've talked to her for 15 years, and not once have I gone to her and given her my experience, and she has not given me an immediate solution. So for me, that keeps me going. No matter what I'm going through, I can give her the details, and she guides me in a way that makes perfect sense. It can be something that I've been pondering for a week, and in 15 minutes, I'm laughing about it. I'm like, that is the silliest thing I've ever heard. Here's my solution. I'm going to follow it. That requires a lot of work on my part. I have to figure out what is the problem, what do I want my solution to be, and is it consistent with who I am as a person and as an owner? That stuff is tough. It's easier to like hide under the sand and be like, this is the type of person I am and I'm sticking to it. I'm always like open for growth, and it might be painful growth, but it's growth.
So what advice would you give to law firm owners out there on how to grow as a person so that their firm can grow?
First and foremost, you need to be emotionally regulated. You need emotional regulation. There's a lot of attorneys in my field, I'm not sure about yours, that are not able to regulate their emotions. If you can't do that, you can't manage and you can't own a firm. There's different ways to do that. Some people can self-study a way to do that. Some people like me have to read and do therapy sessions. Some people have to meditate. Some people have to exercise. There's different ways to get there, but you have to get there if you want to own a successful business.
I'll tell you, being a lawyer is stressful, just working the cases, representing a client, taking their, all that's stressful, the deadlines, blah, blah, blah. But owning a business is stressful too. You got to make payroll. You got to make the investments. Is this the right decision? Do I need to keep this person on, fire them, all these things? And I think that's right. You're going to feel a lot of stress and you're not going to know what you're doing. So you have to be able to push through that. And like you said, regulate that. So
I've had a lot of practice, looking back. Another kind of secret to the success is that from a very young age, I've always been curious and I've always been a learner. I've always if I wanted to do something, I would be like, how can I make that happen? And I just start talking to people and start reading and start exploring. And you would be surprised how many people don't. I thought everybody did that, And so when I would come up against people that didn't, I would be like, look it up, read, ask someone. Oh, you don't know how to do that? Ask someone. Let's find you that answer. And, from my earliest childhood memory with that was when I'm a big sports fan. I love the Oakland A's. I will love them forever, even though they're not the Oakland A's anymore. Don't fight me on that. But when I was in fifth grade when I was obsessed with them. I would watch every game. I would listen to their games on the radio. I had a subscription to the local newspaper so I can read the stats every day and cut it and put it into a scrapbook. And so one day, no one in my family had ever been to an Oakland A's game or a professional sports game. And so I wanted to go. So I'm like, I was watching a game on TV and it said upcoming homestand, call for tickets. So I pick up the phone and I call and they're like, sure, you can have a ticket, give me your credit card. And I was like, oh, I don't have a credit card. I don't even think my parents had a credit card. So they were like, okay, then you need to get yourself to San Jose and buy tickets in person. Well, San Jose for me, I was raised in Gilroy. And so San Jose was a 2-hour bus ride. So then I'm like, okay, where's the bus stop? How do I get there? How much does it cost? So I got myself on that bus, got to San Jose, went to a Ticketmaster, handed them my $4.95 and bought a ticket that I still have to this day, one of my prized possessions, and I went to the Oakland A's game. And same with law school, same with undergrad, same with everything. And same with the business. It's like, okay, S Corp. What is an S Corp? Who do I need to talk to about what that is? And does that make sense for me and what I'm building?
I love that. When I was a kid, I did like the A's for a little while when they had the Bash Brothers,
Yeah, 1988 to 90.
Yeah, that was fun. So let's go back to your childhood a little bit, your upbringing. So I think you're the first to go to college, first to go to law school. Tell me about growing up and all of that, which I'm sure has led to, your go-getter typeness now, right?
Yeah, so a little bit about my mom. My mom wanted to be a teacher her whole life, and she wasn't allowed to be a teacher because she was a woman growing up in Mexico in the 1950s and 60s. So she wasn't allowed to have a job or go to higher education. So better believe it, when I had any inkling or opportunity to do it, I was going to do it. And so that's kind of how I was raised my mom raised 4 girls. We're all a year apart, right? And so that I can't even imagine having 4 kids a year apart. And my mom did it with not speaking English, working 2 jobs. And that example for me was like, you could do anything. Like, there's nothing that could stop you. And luckily, I grew up 2 blocks from a library. And so I spent my summers at that library. I spent my weekends and evenings at the library. In the summers, I would start by being picky about what book I read. And by week 2, I just started grabbing them by sections because I would read sections during the summer. So I'm like, why am I being choosy if I know I'm going to read that whole rack? So I would just grab 5 at a time and read them and 5 at a time. And so that definitely helped because one of my strengths, I think, is I can walk into any room and have a conversation with anyone. I can talk to you about baseball, about business, about the law, about the Real Housewives. Like, I love having all of that information because I think it makes me relatable and it makes people want to connect. And that makes me successful in this business world.
Yeah, we'll talk about Real Housewives later. I'll admit I've seen a few. It's on in my house sometimes.
Only a few? My husband is that person that's like, what are you watching? And 5 minutes later, he's sitting there next to me like,
exactly.
And what did she give?
Exactly. Yeah. All right. So I want to go back again to the early days of the firm. You and Aaron starting this thing. I think, were there people who called you, quote, 2 silly girls trying to start a law firm, or is that what you called yourselves?
No. And the funny thing is when they called us that, we weren't even offended. We were just like, okay, time to show them we're not 2 silly girls. So the story goes, in our first year, I was trying to get this big corporation's business. And in order to get it, we had to interview with the president of the board. So I'm ready to go. I have just finished, my years at Foster Farms. I knew what that meant. I had been to board meetings, I was ready to go. I interviewed with him. It went perfect. By the time the call ended, he told me, you have our business. You have all of our business in Northern California. So I'm thinking win-win. So I get off the phone and the next day he calls me back and he says, oh, you need to interview with the vice president. And I'm thinking, I thought we already had your business and you're the top gun, so why am I going backwards? But okay, I'll do whatever you need. And so one of Erin's superpowers is that she knows everyone in this industry. She knows the adjusters, she knows their bosses, she knows their bosses' bosses. So she kind of was digging around, why did we need this second interview? And someone, just told her straight out, oh, he just wants to make sure you're not 2 silly girls trying to run a law firm. And again, we weren't offended. We were like, oh, well, it's time for us to show this guy that we're not 2 silly girls. So we had the date set. I was practicing my perfectly dressed suit, in the mirror. I was getting ready to go. I had my desk ready. Erin was ready. We log in to interview with this vice president to convince him we weren't silly girls. And he's a hot mess. He's wearing a tank top. His internet's going in and out. He's talking to me leaning sideways because he couldn't get his camera to work. I mean, it was ridiculous. It was certainly not worth our time. So I get off the call and I go up to my husband and I'm explaining to him what the heck I just experienced. And my husband says, oh, it seems like they're 2 silly girls trying to run a corporation.
Well, maybe you weren't upset, but I'm offended for you. But I will say this.
Yeah.
I always love good motivation. For me, if somebody says I can't do it or you can't do it or whatever, I'm like, okay, I'm going to use that. So hopefully you used that.
You have to remember, I'm a woman, I'm Mexican, I'm an immigrant. I get that all the time. I get underestimated all the time. And again, I think that's powerful for me because if you're starting me at the ground, cool, let's go.
So let's get back to the business again. So again, we've talked about it, but you've had this incredible growth. As you look at your firm and your vision and you want to get bigger, what do you see as some of the current constraints sort of holding you back? And how do you go about starting to address those?
In all honesty, our current constraints is we have an endless amount of clients and an endless amount of attorneys. We had some challenges a few months ago finding, because we don't just hire any attorney, right? So if, as you know, the market is tough. And to find someone that's going to fit into our firm is difficult to do. Since the beginning, I've wanted to start kind of a feeder system wherein we hire folks out of law school and train them ourselves. So instead of retraining an attorney with 5-10 years, we are kind of molding them to fit into our firm from the beginning. But that requires a lot of work, as you can imagine. So we launched that program, and where we hired 4 attorneys with no workers' comp experience, and we're kind of training them on the way up. And that's really powerful for us, because if now we can control the feeding system in, we have the clients we need. You put those two things together, and if we haven't launched yet, we're going to launch, right? And so the challenge is if I hire 20 attorneys tomorrow, that's not going to promote a healthy company. That's going to break this thing really fast. So although I want to hire those 20 attorneys, I have to restrain and say no. So that's the most important thing. No. I made a rule currently that we're not hiring attorneys until at least May 1st. So as soon as I make that rule, what happens? 2 attorneys that we've been waiting for call us up and say they're ready to come over.
Always,
right?
always, that always happens, right?
Sorry, and the I want to say yes. I want to say, come on. I want to say we've waited for you for 2 years, but we have to stick to our guns. We have to say no. Hopefully you're still around on May 1st.
That
Because
takes
the bigger vision is more important than that individual win.
Yeah, that takes some serious, I don't even know what the word, but just fortitude. So that's interesting. A lot of lawyers I'll talk to, they're just like, I want more cases. I want more work. I want more work. I'll deal with it later. And it's hard to turn that away or hold that at bay as well. And just from talking to you, it sounds like if you wanted to turn that knob, you could just turn it and it would just start coming. So how do you say no to that as well? Because I know you want to grow. So how do you say no to growth when you know you could do it?
Right. So in order to have the growth that I want, the hundreds of attorneys, I have to sometimes sacrifice short-term growth, right, for the larger vision. And that was telling a client, oh, I'm sorry, we're not taking work right now. Please don't send me work, was excruciating. Because number one, are they going to be offended? Are they going to pull their current work? Are they never going to think about us again? But what really happened was they respected that. They don't want us to do terrible work. They want to work with us. So that was the first time most of them had ever heard that from an owner. We can't, we're at capacity. I'm sorry. In order for us to provide you the top level legal work that you deserve, we're going to need you to put a halt, and we'll get back to you when we're ready to take more files. So it required a buy-in by, this was led by Aaron. I was like, no, bring in everything we can bring in, because that's the way I was raised in law firms. Law firms never said no. I never saw my boss say, no, I'm not taking that case. I never saw anyone do that. So we didn't have a model to follow. So we were, it was either take everything until we break and we don't meet our goals, or challenge ourselves and our clients to know that this is for both of our better goods, for our future. And we took that risk, and it's paid off. We have better relationships with our clients, and now they almost feel like they get to send us work. They're excited when we tell them, oh, we have capacity. We've hired a new attorney. You can send us files again. And they get really excited.
That's cool. I got to admit, I'd be scared to take that approach, but that's really cool. Yeah. Because maybe that wouldn't work for everybody, but that is that stood out to me when maybe the first time we talked, and you mentioned that. I was just like, wow, that's impressive that you have the restraint and the foresight. Say, hey, no, we got a bigger vision, not now. We got to build for later. So that's impressive in a lot of respects. So good for you.
Thank you.
So we're running out of time here in a little bit, but what's your approach? We've talked about your big vision. What is your approach to creating the vision and then going to get it?
That's a great question. When we first started, the three of us did every single thing that gets done today, right? So I did 42 different things. Aaron did 42 different things, and Nicole did 42 different things. Now I have 91 people doing those exact same things, only they're doing it at scale, right? And so it has been very important to understand, oh, that's no longer my job. I got it. That's someone else's job. I need to step back and focus on my job. And, I say often, like, that's below my pay grade. That's above my pay grade. That's not included in my benefits package. Kind of as a joke, but in reality, it's like, I should not be delivering checks or checking the mail. I used to do that, but if I were to do that, that does not a successful company build, right? But I have someone to do that. So I have to, again, self-grow to know when I need to step back and allow others to do their job because they're perfectly capable of doing it. I use the mail example because it's the easiest one, but it gets more complicated. I don't handle files anymore. I don't practice. I'm not a practicing attorney. I'm a law firm owner. I could, but that's not where my value is. That's not where I add value to this company anymore.
Was that hard for you? Was that hard for you stepping away from some of those roles?
Extremely, extremely hard. I had to be pushed out basically because I had to decide, again, staying true to that vision. I can't build that company if I'm taking a deposition or I have a trial tomorrow. I can't do it. Running a business, as you know, is not only Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, but it's 24/7. So if I'm in a deposition on Monday at 10 o'clock in the morning while the banker's trying to get a hold of me or payroll needs me, that's not going to create success.
Absolutely. If you get thrown on a trial, you have a meeting set with a banker or whatever, whoever, and you get thrown on a trial calendar, it's like you got to go to trial, right?
Right.
So.
And then I become not successful or working in my best capacity on either side.
So let me ask this: what does success mean to you?
That's a great question because I ask folks that question too. And more specifically, I always ask, besides money, what motivates you? What do you want out of this, whatever that this is? It's really having a job and creating jobs is very important to me. The difference between me having a good childhood or having a good day as a child or as a teenager or as an adult was how work went for my parents, how work goes for my sister, how work, because we love to talk about our jobs. And so I find that as my responsibility to create something so that when each one of my employees goes home, they're excited. They talk to their spouses about how great their job is, how engaged they are, how motivated they are, how happy they are. That's my measure, because I see the responsibility not only for the employee, but their family, their neighborhoods, their cities, we can have that impact on people's lives. So I don't take it lightly. So what motivates me is creating jobs for good people, creating good jobs for good people.
I love that. And, the bigger you get, the more impact you're going to have. I mean, it's just a reality, both for the clients you represent, but also all the people that come through your firm. Hopefully they stay, but even if they move on somewhere else, and your impact just continues to grow. So I love that.
Yes.
So
Yes.
For little people out there like me that want to grow a big firm like yours, what advice do you have for me?
A little of everything that we've been talking about, right? So first and foremost, surround yourself with the right people. I like to think of life as I'm always in the middle, right? There's people that are better than me, more successful than me, all these other things more than me. And then there's folks that are trying to get to where I'm at. And so I'm always reaching up. Hey, give me your knowledge, give me your time, give me this. But I also just as often reach down. Oh, you need this? Oh, I've found this out. I don't gatekeep any information. If anyone wants to know anything specific, what software program I use, what bank I use, what payroll company I use, I share it, because I think that was one of the most important things is that surround yourself with the right people. Always be curious about growth. For me, knowing I'm growing into a big firm, whatever service or vendor I'm using works for now, but I'm always thinking what's going to work 40 employees from now, 100 employees from now. So I'm always on the lookout for that. I'm
curious. Now, obviously, you can talk to other law firm owners, but do you reach outside of the legal space and talk to different types of owners and founders to see what's working for them?
Yeah, very important that I do that. I do that all the time. I find that, the firms that I had worked for kind of had a dysfunction. It's like it's hard when you're an attorney and then now you want to be a business owner. It's hard to decide which one's more important. They're different. So you have to understand they're different. So I spend a lot of my time in spaces that are, how do you sell shoes? What's the best way to sell shoes? How do you advertise them? How do you, what banker do you use? I'm selling legal services. It's the same as selling shoes, so I try to be in that space as much of a business person as I can be. It benefits everyone. My greatest pride, I believe I told you this, but last year we were ranked on the Inc. 5000 list of fastest growing companies in the United States. We were ranked 678 out of 5,000.
Wow.
Not 5,000 firms. Thank you. Not 5,000 firms, 5,000 businesses. We were ranked across all businesses. When we looked at the firms in the legal industry, we were 14th in firms. So it's really important to me to have a solid, good business first. And by the way, we're a law firm.
Well, congrats on that. That's really impressive. So
thank you.
So, as we wrap up here, I want to move outside. I want to ask you this is a question I occasionally ask people. We've talked all about building your business and your law firm. If you weren't building a law firm or practicing law, what would you be doing?
I would own a soap company.
So tell me about that. What?
I know, it's so strange. I'm fascinated by soap. I just love it. I love it. I love being around it. I envision like this French boutique with like a soap, sinks everywhere so you can try out my fancy soap. And, you buy a birthday gift for soap. I think it's just like the simplicity. I often feel like the complexity of a large law firm and the way I operate is on such a large scale that I almost, kind of want to be that little soap company that's just, here's a piece of soap, you bought it, awesome.
Well, I talk to a lot of law firm owners that are towards the end of their journey in the law, and they say they want to transition. And from my experience, the ones that are able to do that successfully have sort of a plan B or something for after. So you got your plan after if you're ready to get out of here. So.
Right.
Well, Angel, appreciate you coming on. This has been real fun. Love getting to know more about you and your story. But for anybody out there that wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way to find you?
That's a great question. So our website is wclawcorp.com. That's probably the easiest way to find us. That'll get you to all of our social media networks. We have a lot of fun here. If you want to see what that looks like, go on our Instagram page, our Facebook page. It's all WC Law Corp.
Good point. If you're a workers' comp defense lawyer looking for a job, they're not hiring yet, but you can get on the list, reach out, and you can join this cool team. So again, thanks, Angel.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Founding Partner Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts to stay up to date on the latest episodes. You can also connect with Jonathan on LinkedIn and check out the show notes with links to resources mentioned throughout our discussion by visiting www.lawfirmgc.com. We'll see you next time for more origin stories and insights from successful law firm founders.